I'm Claire, 29, and my ex-husband just smiled at the judge like he'd already won the lottery. She's just a housewife, Your Honor, Ethan says with that practiced confidence that once made me fall in love with him. Never contributed anything meaningful to our business. He adjusts his tie like he's closing a $1 million deal. It was always me who took care of everything. I keep my hand steady on the leather folder in my lap, the same folder that's about to wipe that smug expression right off his face. 3 years of his lies documented with the patience of someone who learned the hard way that pretty words don't pay the bills. He has no idea what's coming. And honestly, that's the best part. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt underestimated by someone who claimed to love you. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to where this whole mess started, because trust me, it's not where you think. This story doesn't begin with a cheating husband or a nasty divorce. It begins with a 24-year-old girl standing in a lawyer's office, inheriting more money than she'd ever seen in her life. My grandmother, Eleanor Morrison, had always been the black sheep of our family. While everyone else played it safe with savings accounts and conservative investments, Grandma Ellie put her money into real estate, startups, and what my father called risky nonsense. Turns out risky nonsense has a way of paying off when you're smart about it. Miss Morrison, the estate attorney said, sliding papers across his mahogany desk, your grandmother's portfolio is valued at approximately $3 million. $3 million. I sat there trying to process numbers that seemed more fictional than real. My parents had spent my entire childhood complaining about money, clipping coupons, making me feel guilty for wanting anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. And here was Grandma Ellie, quietly building a fortune while living in her modest 2-bedroom house with the garden full of wildflowers. She left specific instructions, the attorney continued, that this inheritance was to be used for your independence and happiness, not to supplement anyone else's lifestyle. Even from beyond the grave, Grandma Ellie was looking out for me. Smart woman. Too bad I wasn't quite smart enough to heed her warning about certain charming men who would come into my life later. With Grandma Ellie's inheritance burning a hole in my bank account, I did what any sensible 24-year-old would do. I started a business. Interior design had always been my passion, the thing I was actually good at while everyone else in my family excelled at making me feel inadequate about my choices. I invested $300,000 into Claire Morrison Design, setting up a proper LLC, renting studio space in the Arts District, and building a portfolio that showcased exactly the kind of high-end work I wanted to attract. No family money to fall back on if things went wrong. Well, technically there was, but I was determined to make this work on its own merit. The business took off faster than I'd expected. Turns out having actual capital to invest in quality marketing and professional presentation makes a difference. Who knew? Within 6 months, I was booking clients with 7-figure renovation budgets. Within a year, I was turning people away. By year 2, Claire Morrison Design was featured in Architectural Digest. By year 3, I had a waiting list 6 months long and was seriously considering expanding. That's when I met Ethan. It was at a charity gala, one of those events where successful people go to see and be seen while writing tax-deductible checks. I was there representing my work, showcasing a mansion renovation that had just been completed for a tech CEO's wife, the kind of project that makes other designers hate you just a little bit. Ethan approached me during cocktail hour, tall and confident in that expensive suit way that suggests family money and good breeding. Claire Morrison, he said, extending his hand. I've been admiring your work all evening. Which piece? I asked, because honestly I had 3 different projects on display. All of it. But especially the way you handled the natural lighting in the Ashford estate. Most designers would have just thrown money at bigger windows. He actually understood my work. In a room full of people who saw interior design as expensive furniture arrangement, here was someone who got the technical artistry involved. I was impressed, and apparently a little stupid. Ethan Lawson, he said, that smile doing things to my common sense that should have come with a warning label. What do you do, Ethan Lawson? Consulting, business development, market analysis, strategic planning. The boring stuff that keeps the creative people in business. The boring stuff that keeps creative people in business. I should have paid more attention to that phrase. Should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why a successful consultant was spending his Friday night at a charity gala instead of working on whatever important business development project was surely demanding his attention. But hindsight is 20/20, and charm is a powerful drug when administered by someone who knows exactly how to use it. Dating Ethan felt like being upgraded to first class when you've been flying coach your whole life. He knew the best restaurants, had connections everywhere, and treated me like I was the most fascinating woman he'd ever met. After years of being dismissed by family members who thought my career was cute, being with someone who seemed genuinely impressed by my success was intoxicating. "You're incredible," he'd say, watching me work late into the evening on design concepts. "The way your mind works, the vision you have, it's like watching an artist create magic." I should have noticed that he said this while lounging on my office couch, drinking wine I'd paid for, in the studio I'd rented with my own money. But when someone's telling you everything you've always wanted to hear, you tend to overlook the details that don't fit the fantasy. Our relationship moved fast. Within 6 months, we were practically living together. Within a year, he was attending client meetings with me, charming potential customers with that easy confidence that made everyone instantly like him. I started introducing him as my business partner at networking events, which seemed natural since he was always there, always contributing to conversations about market trends and client psychology. "You two make such a great team," clients would say, and I'd beam with pride. Finally, someone who understood my work well enough to support it properly. Someone who could handle the business side while I focused on the creative aspects I loved. The proposal happened at the site of my biggest project to date, a complete renovation of a historic mansion that had been featured on the cover of 3 different design magazines. He'd arranged for champagne and roses in the main ballroom, with all our friends and family hidden behind the grand staircase. "Claire," he said, dropping to one knee in front of the marble fireplace I'd spent 6 months sourcing, "you've shown me what it means to build something beautiful. Will you build a life with me?" Of course I said yes. When someone proposes in the middle of your greatest professional achievement, it feels like the universe confirming that everything is falling into place exactly as it should. The wedding was perfect. Small, elegant, held in the garden of one of my completed projects because Ethan said he wanted to be surrounded by my success when we started our new life together. Even my usually critical family seemed impressed by his charm and obvious devotion to my career. "You found a good one," my mother whispered during the reception. "He really understands how to support your little business." My little business. Even on my wedding day, even surrounded by evidence of my success, it was still diminished to hobby status. But I had Ethan now, someone who saw my work for what it really was, someone who would never let anyone minimize my achievements. Or so I thought. The first crack in the facade appeared about 6 months after the wedding, during what should have been a routine business meeting. Margaret Ashworth, the wife of a pharmaceutical executive, was considering a complete renovation of their estate, the kind of project that could single-handedly fund my expansion plans. "Mr. Lawson," she said, addressing Ethan directly despite the fact that I was the one who designed her friend's award-winning kitchen renovation. "I'm so impressed by your portfolio. The work you did on the Sterling residence was absolutely magnificent." I started to correct her. The Sterling residence was entirely my design, my vision, my 3 months of 16-hour days bringing their impossible requirements to life. But Ethan's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. "We're so proud of that project," he said smoothly. "Claire and I work very closely together on all our designs. Our designs. Not my designs. Our designs." After Margaret left with promises to call within the week, I confronted him in the parking lot. "Why didn't you correct her?" "About what?" He seemed genuinely confused. "She thinks you designed the Sterling house." "Claire, honey, does it really matter who gets credit as long as we get the contract? We're married now. What's mine is yours, what's yours is mine. What's mine is yours, what's yours is mine." The math on that equation seemed a little uneven, considering I was the one who'd built the reputation, developed the skills, and invested the inheritance money that made our current lifestyle possible. But I let it slide. Marriage is about compromise, right? About supporting each other's success even when the recognition gets a little blurred. The second crack appeared when I discovered he'd been using our business credit card for personal expenses. Nothing dramatic. Dinners with friends, golf games, a weekend trip to Vegas that he'd described as networking. "Ethan, these charges aren't business expenses." "Sure they are." I met 3 potential clients at that restaurant, discussed our services with 2 guys at the golf course, and the Vegas trip was a conference on luxury market trends. What conference? It was more of an informal networking situation. You know how these things work. I didn't, actually. But I was learning that questioning Ethan's business decisions somehow always made me sound like the naive wife who didn't understand how real business networking functioned. The third crack was the biggest one, though I didn't recognize it at the time. We were at a dinner party thrown by one of my clients, surrounded by successful people discussing their various business ventures, when someone asked Ethan about his background. "Oh, I'm in business development," he said casually. "I specialize in taking creative enterprises to the next level. Market analysis, strategic planning, client acquisition, the foundation work that turns artistic vision into profitable business." "How interesting. What's your biggest success story?" Ethan smiled and gestured toward me. "Well, when I met Claire, she had this charming little design hobby. Sweet residential projects, very artistic, but no real business structure. We've grown it into a serious commercial enterprise. Charming little design hobby. The business that was already generating 6 figures annually when I met him had been reduced to a hobby that he'd somehow transformed into success through his superior business acumen. I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror, trying to understand why I felt so angry. He was proud of our success. That was good, right? He was supporting my career, helping it grow. That was what I wanted, wasn't it? So why did it feel like something was being stolen from me, one conversation at a time? The slow erosion of my professional identity continued so gradually that I almost didn't notice it happening. Ethan started attending client meetings without me, explaining that he could handle the initial consultations while I focused on the creative work. When I protested, he pointed out how much more efficient it was. Why should I waste time on sales pitches when I could be designing? You're the artist, Claire. I'm the business guy. It's the perfect partnership. Except the perfect partnership seemed to involve my name disappearing from business cards, my signature being replaced by his on contracts, and my design concepts being presented as collaborative efforts between the Lawsons. The breaking point came during a consultation for what would have been my biggest client to date, a tech billionaire's wife who wanted to renovate their entire compound in the hills. I'd spent weeks developing preliminary concepts, researching materials, creating mood boards that captured her vision of understated luxury with environmental consciousness. I arrived at the meeting to find Ethan already seated in the conference room with Mrs. Chen, my design boards arranged on the table in front of him. Claire, perfect timing, he said without getting up. I was just explaining our design philosophy to Mrs. Chen. Our design philosophy. The design philosophy I'd developed over years of study, practice, and refinement was apparently something we'd created together. These concepts are extraordinary, Mrs. Chen said, examining my work. Mr. Lawson, your vision for sustainable luxury is exactly what we've been looking for. Thank you, Ethan replied. My wife assists with some of the technical details, but the overall creative direction comes from our collaborative process. I assist with technical details. Technical details like creating every single element of the design she was praising. After Mrs. Chen left with promises to move forward with our proposal, I confronted Ethan in the parking lot. What the hell was that? What do you mean? You presented my work as your own design philosophy. Claire, we're married. It's not your work or my work, it's our work. You didn't design any of it. You don't even know the difference between sustainable materials and eco-friendly finishes. I know how to sell the vision, which is just as important as creating it. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my successful business had somehow become our business, while my individual contributions had been reduced to technical assistance. When had I agreed to this arrangement? When had my name stopped being the primary one associated with work I'd created entirely on my own? More importantly, when had I become too afraid of seeming ungrateful or possessive to defend my own professional identity? The next morning, I called my business attorney. Marcus had helped me set up the LLC when I first started the company, and he'd handled the legal work when Ethan and I got married. If anyone could help me understand how to protect my interests without destroying my marriage, it would be him. Marcus, I need to ask you about something. What's on your mind, Claire? Hypothetically, if my husband wanted to become an official partner in my business, what would that process look like? Long pause. Claire, is this purely hypothetical? For now. Well, it would require amending your LLC operating agreement, transferring ownership percentages, and documenting his capital contribution or sweat equity investment. Why? How would you document sweat equity? Detailed records of contributions, time investment, business development activities that directly resulted in increased revenue. It's actually quite difficult to prove unless you've been maintaining extensive documentation. I thought about all the client meetings Ethan had attended, all the networking events where he'd represented our business, all the times he'd claimed credit for growth that had actually resulted from my design work and professional reputation. What documentation existed of his actual contributions versus his claimed contributions? Marcus, I think I need to schedule a meeting. That appointment would change everything, though I didn't know it yet. Sometimes the most important decisions feel like small administrative tasks, until you look back and realize they were the moment you started fighting for your own life. Marcus scheduled our meeting for the following Friday, giving me a week to think about what I really wanted to discuss. On the surface, it seemed simple. Understand the legal process for adding a business partner. But underneath, I was grappling with questions that went far deeper than corporate structure. Had Ethan actually contributed to the growth of my business, or had he simply been present while I did the work? Was I being ungrateful for resenting his growing role in my professional life? Or was I recognizing that something valuable was being taken from me without my explicit consent? The week between scheduling the appointment and meeting with Marcus became a time of careful observation. I started paying attention to exactly what Ethan did during his business development activities, documenting his actual contributions versus his claimed contributions. Tuesday. Ethan attended lunch with a potential client while I worked on design concepts for 3 different projects. When he returned, he reported that the client was very interested and would definitely be moving forward. I called the client that evening to follow up and learned that Ethan had spent most of the lunch talking about his golf game and hadn't even brought our portfolio. Wednesday, Ethan claimed to be working on a marketing strategy for our expansion plans. I found him in his office playing online poker while a half-written email sat open on his screen. When I asked about his progress, he said he was developing networking contacts through the poker site. Thursday, Ethan attended a networking event for local business owners, promising to make connections that would lead to referrals. He returned home drunk at midnight with business cards from 3 different bars, but no actual business contacts. Friday arrived with a clarity I hadn't expected. As I sat across from Marcus in his downtown office, I realized I wasn't there to learn about partnership agreements. I was there to learn how to protect what I'd built from someone who was slowly stealing it. "Claire," Marcus said gently, "you seem upset. What's really going on?" I told him everything. The gradual erosion of my professional identity, the client meetings where Ethan took credit for my work, the business expenses that weren't actually business expenses, the growing sense that my marriage was becoming a hostile takeover disguised as partnership. "Has he asked you to sign anything?" Marcus asked. "Not yet. But he's been hinting about making things official from a legal standpoint." "Good. Don't sign anything without having me review it first." "Marcus, am I being paranoid? Maybe this is just how marriage works in business. Maybe I'm overthinking things." Marcus leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "Claire, you built a successful business entirely on your own before you met Ethan. Your revenue has grown consistently based on your reputation, your design skills, and your client relationships. From what you've described, his contributions have been minimal at best. But he's my husband. Shouldn't I want to share success with him? Sharing success is different from transferring ownership. If someone else had gradually taken credit for your work, claimed partnership in your business without investing capital or contributing measurable value, and was positioning themselves to legally claim half of what you'd built, what would you call that?" I knew what I'd call it. I just wasn't ready to use that word about my own husband yet. What should I do? Document everything. Every meeting, every client interaction, every business expense, every claim he makes about his contributions. If he does ask you to sign partnership papers, you'll need evidence of what his actual role has been versus what he claims it's been. How do I document conversations? Legally? In this state, you can record conversations as long as one party consents. That would be you, recording my own husband. The idea made my stomach turn, but not as much as the possibility of losing everything I'd worked for to someone who'd contributed nothing but charm and entitlement. "Marcus, if this goes badly, if he really is trying to take my business, how ugly could things get?" "Very ugly, Claire. Very ugly indeed." I left Marcus's office with a small digital recorder and the beginning of a plan I hoped I'd never have to use. The recorder was smaller than I'd expected, about the size of a USB drive, and could capture hours of conversation with crystal-clear audio quality. I told myself it was just a precaution, insurance against misunderstandings, a way to keep accurate records of business discussions. But deep down, I knew I was gathering evidence for a war I could feel coming. The first recording happened completely by accident. I'd left the device in my purse during dinner, and it captured Ethan's phone conversation with someone he called David about moving forward with the plan we discussed. "She's completely clueless," Ethan said, thinking I was still in the bathroom. "Still sees this as a marriage instead of a business arrangement. Makes everything so much easier." When I returned to the table, he was back to being the loving husband, asking about my day and showing interest in my latest design project. But the recorder had captured something else entirely. A man discussing our marriage like a strategic business acquisition. Over the next few weeks, the recordings became a catalog of my husband's real thoughts about our relationship, our business, and my role in both. The beauty of it is that she did all the hard work already, he told someone during a golf game I'd paid for with business funds. Built the reputation, established the client base, created the systems. All I have to do is position myself as the business brain behind the operation. "What if she objects?" the other person asked. "Object to what? We're married. What's hers is mine. Besides, she's not exactly the confrontational type." Not the confrontational type. I almost laughed listening to that recording later. Ethan had apparently mistaken my collaborative nature for weakness, my willingness to share credit for an inability to defend my own interests. Fatal mistake. The most damaging recording came after a client dinner, where Ethan had introduced himself as the founder and creative director of Claire Morrison Design. I'd sat there speechless, watching him accept compliments for work I'd done while presenting me as his incredibly talented assistant. That night, he came home drunk and talkative. "You know what, Claire? You should thank me." "For what?" I asked, the recorder running from my nightstand. "For turning your little hobby into a real business. When I met you, it was just a cute side project. Now look at it. Major clients, real revenue, actual respect in the industry. The business was already successful when we met, Ethan. Successful for a hobby, maybe. But it took real business expertise to scale it properly. Market positioning, client psychology, strategic networking. That's not art, that's business. And business is what I do. What exactly have you contributed that I couldn't have done myself? Claire, sweetheart, you're an artist. Artists don't understand markets. They don't understand client acquisition. They don't understand the networking that drives real business growth. You're amazing at making things pretty, but pretty doesn't pay the bills without proper business development. Making things pretty. 3 years of architectural study, 5 years of professional experience, and a 7-figure business reduced to making things pretty. So you think you deserve ownership in my company because you understand business and I don't? Our company, Claire. And yes, I think the person who transformed it from a hobby into a real enterprise deserves recognition for that contribution. I let him keep talking, the recorder capturing every word of his plan to claim partnership in a business he'd contributed nothing to, except attendance at meetings and the occasional charming conversation with clients who were already committed to hiring me. By the time he passed out, I had enough evidence to end our marriage and protect my business. But I wasn't ready to use it yet. Part of me still hoped that the man I'd fallen in love with was buried somewhere underneath this stranger who talked about our marriage like a hostile takeover. That hope would die completely within the next few months, but the recorder would capture its death throes with perfect clarity. The final phase of evidence gathering began when Ethan started getting sloppy. Success had made him confident, and confidence had made him careless. He stopped pretending to work on legitimate business development and started openly using company resources for personal ventures that had nothing to do with interior design. "I'm exploring some investment opportunities," he announced one morning over coffee. "What kind of investments?" "Diversification strategies. The design business is great, but we should be thinking bigger picture. Real estate development, maybe some tech startups. Building a portfolio that goes beyond just decorating houses. Decorating houses. My award-winning commercial projects and multi-million-dollar residential designs had been reduced to decorating houses. Are you using business funds for these investments?" "Claire, it's all connected. Business development, investment research, networking with potential partners. It's all part of building our empire. Our empire. The empire I'd built with my inheritance, my skills, my reputation, and my work was apparently something we'd created together through some magical process that didn't require his actual contribution to anything other than spending my money. The recordings from this period were devastating. Phone calls where he discussed leveraging the wife's business for personal investments. Conversations about positioning himself for maximum benefit in case of relationship changes. Strategy sessions with his lawyer friend David about protecting assets and documenting spousal dependence. But the most damning evidence came when I discovered he'd been meeting with potential investors for his own ventures, using my business as collateral for loans I'd never approved. "Mr. Lawson," I heard him say during a recorded phone call, "Claire Morrison Design is valued at approximately $2 million. As co-owner and business partner, I can offer that as security for the development project we discussed." Co-owner, business partner, security for deals I knew nothing about. That night, I made copies of every business document, every contract, every piece of evidence that proved I'd built the company entirely with my own money and work. I opened a separate bank account and started transferring money to protect it from whatever schemes Ethan was planning. When he asked about the financial changes, implemented new tax strategies recommended by our accountant. He nodded along without really listening, too focused on his own plans to pay attention to mine. "You know, Claire, I've been thinking about expanding the business." "In what way?" "Bringing in additional partners, maybe franchising the concept. Your artistic vision combined with real business expertise could be huge." "Additional partners?" "Investors who understand scaling, growth strategies, market expansion, people who can take what we've built and turn it into something truly significant." What we've built. He'd become so convinced of his own revisionist history that he genuinely believed he'd contributed to building something that had existed and thrived before he'd ever set foot in my office. What would my role be in this expansion? Creative director, of course. You'd focus on what you do best, the artistic side, while the business partners handle operations, finance, strategic planning. All the complex stuff that's not really your strength, not really my strength. The woman who'd built a 7-figure business from scratch apparently lacked the business acumen to manage her own company. That conversation happened on a Tuesday evening in our kitchen, recorded with perfect clarity by the device I'd learned to activate with casual gestures that looked like adjusting my phone or reaching for my purse. By Wednesday morning, I'd made the decision that would change everything. I called a divorce attorney. Have you ever experienced someone trying to take credit for your work? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Finding the right divorce attorney felt like selecting a surgeon. The decision could determine whether I survived the operation with my vital organs intact. I needed someone who understood business law, someone who wouldn't be charmed by Ethan's practiced sincerity, someone who could see through the collaborative marriage narrative to the financial fraud underneath. Sarah Chen came highly recommended by Marcus, with a reputation for handling complex divorces involving business assets and spousal misconduct. When I met her at her downtown office, I understood immediately why other attorneys respected her. "Mrs. Lawson," she said, reviewing the preliminary information I'd provided, "before we discuss strategy, I need to understand your goals. Are you looking to preserve your marriage or protect your assets?" "Protect my assets. The marriage is already over, I just haven't told him yet." "What evidence do you have of your separate property claims?" I opened my briefcase and laid out 3 years of documentation, business registration papers showing I'd founded the company with my inheritance before meeting Ethan, tax returns proving the company's profitability prior to our relationship, client contracts signed solely by me, banking records showing all initial investments came from my personal funds. Sarah examined each document with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen too many wives lose everything to husbands who'd contributed nothing but charm and entitlement. "This is excellent documentation of separate property, but we need to prepare for his counter-arguments. He'll claim that business growth during the marriage created community property interests. The growth came from my work, my reputation, my client relationships. Can you prove that?" I pulled out my phone and played her selected recordings. Ethan's voice filled her office, describing how he'd transformed my hobby into a real business, while I handled the artistic details. Sarah's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she'd heard variations of this story before. "These recordings are legally admissible in this state?" "One-party consent. I'm on every conversation." "How many hours of recorded material do you have?" "Approximately 40 hours over 18 months. Every major conversation about business, money, or our roles in the company." Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing the implications of what I'd just told her. "Mrs. Lawson, most people in your situation have suspicions and complaints. You have evidence that could not only protect your business, but potentially result in criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement." "Criminal charges?" "Using business funds for personal investments, misrepresenting ownership to potential investors, claiming partnership status to leverage assets for unauthorized loans. Those aren't marital disputes, they're crimes." I hadn't considered the criminal implications. I'd been so focused on protecting my business that I hadn't realized Ethan's actions might constitute actual fraud. "What happens now?" "We file for divorce and request immediate injunctive relief to prevent him from accessing business assets or representing himself as an owner. Then we present evidence of his misconduct and let him explain to a judge how he thinks he deserves half of something he stole from." "How long will this take?" 6 months to a year, depending on how aggressively he fights. "But Mrs. Lawson, based on what you've shown me, I don't think he'll fight very hard once he realizes what evidence you have." "Why not?" Sarah smiled for the first time since I'd entered her office. "Because men like your husband count on their victims being too ashamed, too confused, or too financially dependent to fight back. They're not prepared for someone who documented everything and can prove exactly what happened." That afternoon, I signed the retainer agreement and authorized Sarah to begin divorce proceedings. As I left her office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope that I might actually survive this with my life's work intact. Ethan still had no idea what was coming. His confidence in his own cleverness would be his downfall, but he wouldn't realize that until it was too late to save himself. The papers would be served next week. I had 7 days to prepare for the war he'd been planning while I was still believing in our marriage. The divorce papers were served on a Thursday morning while Ethan was at the golf course, using our business credit card to network with potential clients. I'd arranged to be out of town for a design consultation, giving him time to process the shock without having to face my presence immediately. He called me 6 times before I answered. "Claire, what the hell is this?" "Divorce papers, Ethan." I thought that would be obvious. "But why? We can work through whatever's bothering you. We're partners, we're building something together." Partners. Even facing divorce, he couldn't resist claiming co-ownership of my achievements. "Ethan, I've been recording our conversations for the past 18 months. Silence. Long, telling silence. Recording what conversations? All of them. Every time you described my business as your business. Every time you claimed credit for work you didn't do. Every time you used company funds for personal expenses. Every time you called my career a hobby that you transformed into something significant. More silence. Then, Claire, you're being emotional. You're not thinking clearly about what divorce would mean for our business. Our business. Even confronted with evidence of his fraud, he couldn't acknowledge that the business had never been his. There is no our business, Ethan. There's my business, which you've been systematically stealing from for 3 years. I haven't stolen anything. I've been building what we have together. Building what exactly? Name one client you brought to the company through your own efforts. That's not how business development works, Claire. You don't understand the networking, the relationship building, the market positioning that creates success. I understand that you've been using my reputation to take credit for my work while contributing nothing but attendance at meetings and spending my money. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but I'd heard enough. Even caught red-handed, Ethan couldn't admit what he'd done. In his mind, marrying me had somehow entitled him to ownership of everything I'd built before I met him. Sarah had warned me about this. Narcissists don't confess, she'd said. They double down, they attack, they play victim. Be prepared for him to claim you're having a breakdown, that you're being manipulated by lawyers, that you're destroying something beautiful out of spite. She was right. Over the next few weeks, Ethan launched a charm offensive that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so transparent. Flowers delivered to my temporary apartment. Calls to my friends and family explaining that I was going through a difficult time and making decisions I'd regret later. Social media posts about how much he loved and missed his creative partner. But his legal strategy was more aggressive. David Henderson, his attorney friend, filed motions claiming that community property laws entitled Ethan to half of all marital assets, including the business I'd built with separate property. They requested spousal support, claiming that Ethan had sacrificed his own career opportunities to support mine. Henderson's filings painted me as an unstable wife trying to deny her husband his rightful share of their joint success. According to their narrative, Ethan had been the business brain behind Claire Morrison Design, while I'd handled the creative execution under his guidance and direction. The audacity was breathtaking. They were actually arguing that my own business belonged to him because he'd attended meetings and offered unsolicited advice about marketing strategies. Sarah's response was surgical in its precision. She filed counter motions with extensive documentation proving that Claire Morrison Design had been established, funded, and operated entirely with my separate property. She included selected recordings demonstrating Ethan's own admissions that he'd contributed nothing to the business beyond networking at events I'd paid him to attend. But the centerpiece of her filing was a detailed accounting of Ethan's unauthorized use of business funds for personal investments, luxury purchases, and what she termed lifestyle maintenance that had no business purpose. Your husband's attorney is going to be very surprised when he sees what we have, Sarah told me during one of our strategy sessions. I don't think they realize how thoroughly you documented his misconduct. What happens next? We go to court, and we let your husband explain to a judge how he thinks he deserves half of a business he embezzled from. The trial date was set for 6 weeks later. 6 weeks to prepare for the moment when Ethan would finally face the consequences of underestimating the woman he'd married. He still thought he was going to win. That confidence would make his downfall even more satisfying to watch. The morning of our court date, I woke up with the calm clarity that comes from months of preparation. Every document was organized, every recording was labeled, every piece of evidence was ready to destroy the fiction that Ethan had built around our marriage and my business. I dressed carefully, professional but not intimidating, successful but not flashy. Sarah had coached me on courtroom presentation, emphasizing that I needed to appear as the competent businesswoman I was, not the emotional wife that Ethan's team would try to portray. The courthouse was smaller than I'd expected, but the courtroom felt enormous when we entered. Ethan sat at the plaintiff's table with David Henderson, looking confident in his most expensive suit. He'd even worn his lucky tie, the one he'd bought with my money for our first major client presentation. When our eyes met across the room, he attempted a sad smile that was probably meant to convey hurt and disappointment at my betrayal. Instead, it reminded me of every time he'd lied to my face while stealing my work, my money, and my professional identity. Judge Williams called the court to order, and Henderson launched into his opening statement with the practiced sincerity of someone who believed his own fiction. Your Honor, we have before us a tragic case of vindictive divorce proceedings designed to deny a devoted husband his rightful share of the business empire they built together. Henderson gestured toward Ethan with something approaching reverence. Mr. Lawson sacrificed his own promising career in business consulting to support his wife's artistic endeavors, providing the strategic expertise and business acumen that transformed her small design hobby into a thriving commercial enterprise. Design hobby. Even in court, even under oath, they couldn't acknowledge that I'd built a successful business before Ethan had ever entered my life. Henderson continued, painting Ethan as the unrecognized genius behind my success, the business mind who'd guided my artistic vision into commercial viability. According to their narrative, I was the talent, but Ethan was the brains. I created pretty things, but he created the business structure that made those pretty things profitable. The evidence will show, Henderson concluded, that Mr. Lawson's contributions to their shared business ventures entitle him to the recognition and compensation that his wife's emotional state has led her to deny. Sarah's opening statement was devastating in its simplicity. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mr. Lawson contributed nothing to a business that was already successful when they met, stole money from that business for personal use, misrepresented himself as a co-owner to potential investors, and systematically took credit for work he never performed. She paused, letting that sink in. This isn't a marriage dispute. It's a fraud case disguised as a divorce proceeding. Henderson called Ethan as his first witness, and I watched my soon-to-be ex-husband lie under oath with the same casual confidence he'd once used to steal my professional identity. Mr. Lawson, Henderson began, please describe your role in the development of Claire Morrison design. Well, Ethan said, settling into the witness chair like he was hosting a dinner party. When I met Claire, she had this wonderful artistic talent but no real business structure. She was doing lovely residential projects, very creative, but there was no strategic vision, no systematic approach to growth, no strategic vision. The business plan I'd developed before meeting him, the marketing strategy that had landed me in Architectural Digest, the client acquisition systems that had built my reputation. Apparently none of that constituted strategic vision. How did you transform the business? It was really about bringing professional business development to her artistic foundation, market analysis, client psychology, networking strategies, the systematic approaches that turn artistic vision into sustainable commercial success. Sustainable commercial success. The same success I'd achieved before he'd ever seen my portfolio. Henderson led Ethan through a detailed account of his supposed contributions, each claim more outrageous than the last. According to his testimony, he'd personally developed our marketing strategy, established our pricing structure, and cultivated the professional relationships that had driven our growth. The fiction was so complete, so confidently presented, that someone who didn't know the truth might actually believe it. Then Sarah began her cross-examination, and everything changed. Mr. Lawson, Sarah began, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who held devastating evidence. You testified that you developed the marketing strategy for Claire Morrison Design. Are you familiar with the campaign that resulted in the Architectural Digest feature? Of course. That was a pivotal moment in our business development. Can you describe the specific elements of that marketing campaign? Ethan's confidence flickered for just a moment. Well, it was a comprehensive approach involving media outreach, professional networking, portfolio presentation. Mr. Lawson, that Architectural Digest feature occurred 6 months before you met my client. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. I watched Ethan's face go through several expressions as he realized he'd claimed credit for something that predated our relationship. I must have misremembered the timeline, he said, attempting to recover. Let's help refresh your memory, Sarah said, introducing business documents that established the exact chronology of my success. This is the business registration for Claire Morrison Design, filed 18 months before you met. This is the first major client contract, signed 14 months before you met. This is the tax return showing 6-figure revenue, filed 8 months before you met. Each document landed like a physical blow. Ethan's confident narrative was crumbling in real time as Sarah systematically proved that every success he'd claimed had occurred before I'd ever set eyes on him. Mr. Lawson, during your marriage, did you use business credit cards for personal expenses? Occasionally, for networking purposes, such as the $3,000 weekend in Las Vegas that you described as a business conference. That was legitimate business development. What conference was that, Mr. Lawson? Another long pause. It was more of an informal networking situation. At the Bellagio Casino? Henderson objected, but the damage was done. The jury could see exactly what kind of business development Ethan had been conducting with my money. But Sarah saved the best for last. Mr. Lawson, I'm going to play a recording of a conversation you had with my client on March 15th of last year. Are you prepared to hear your own voice? Ethan's face went completely white. In the 18 months I'd been recording him, he'd apparently forgotten that his own words would be his downfall. Sarah played the recording where Ethan described transforming my little hobby into a real business and explained how pretty doesn't pay the bills without proper business development. Then she played the one where he discussed leveraging the wife's business for his personal investments. Finally, she played the devastating recording where he'd told his friend, "The beauty of it is that she did all the hard work already, built the reputation, established the client base, created the systems. All I have to do is position myself as the business brain behind the operation." The courtroom was silent except for Ethan's own voice, recorded with perfect clarity, describing exactly how he'd planned to steal my life's work while I was still believing in our marriage. When the recording ended, Henderson looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Williams was staring at Ethan with the expression of someone who'd just witnessed a confession to fraud. "Mr. Lawson," the judge said, "did you just hear yourself describe your wife's business as something you planned to steal?" "Your Honor, that conversation was taken out of context." "What context would make those statements acceptable, Mr. Lawson?" Ethan had no answer. There was no context that could explain away his own words describing his systematic plan to claim ownership of work he'd never done, money he'd never earned, and success he'd never achieved. Sarah called me as her final witness, but by then the case was already over. Ethan's own recordings had convicted him more effectively than any testimony I could have provided. When Judge Williams delivered his verdict, he didn't just rule in my favor. He expressed disgust at the level of deception and entitlement that Ethan had displayed. "Mr. Lawson," the judge said, "in 30 years on this bench, I have rarely encountered such a clear example of attempted fraud disguised as marital rights. You contributed nothing to a business that your wife built entirely through her own work and investment, yet you sought to claim half ownership through manipulation and misrepresentation. The judge awarded me full ownership of Claire Morrison Design, plus restitution for the money Ethan had stolen, plus attorney fees, plus damages for the harm his actions had caused to my business reputation. But the most satisfying moment came when a reporter asked me outside the courthouse how it felt to win. I looked directly into the camera and said exactly what I'd been preparing to say for months. I didn't win. I just recovered what was always mine. As I walked away from the courthouse, I thought about Grandma Ellie and her inheritance money that had started it all. She'd left specific instructions that the money was to be used for my independence and happiness, not to supplement anyone else's lifestyle. Turns out she'd been preparing me for this battle all along. 6 months later, Claire Morrison Design was thriving more than ever. The trial had inadvertently become the best publicity I could have asked for, and clients were calling specifically because they wanted to work with the woman who'd outmaneuvered the man who tried to steal her success. I never saw Ethan again, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd left town shortly after the trial. Apparently, word had gotten around about his business practices, and potential clients weren't as interested in his consulting services once they understood what those services actually entailed. The business continued to grow. I hired additional staff, and I started speaking at conferences about protecting professional assets and personal relationships. The story resonated with women who'd experienced similar situations, and I found unexpected satisfaction in helping others avoid the mistakes I'd almost made. But the best part? Every morning when I walked into my office, I saw my name on the door, my work on the walls, and my success displayed proudly for everyone to see. No one could ever again claim credit for what I'd built, because I'd learned to document my worth before anyone tried to steal it. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about women who refuse to be underestimated. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply proving you were worth more than they ever realized. The gavel fell, but my story was just beginning.